Hello, one and all. Welcome back to me talking about Kamen Saber. I still don't have a set intro for these after 20 episodes because we are on episode 20 to destroy the stronghold, the will of the sword. We're on episode 20 of Kamen Saber, and I still don't have an intro good enough for these videos. But, these are very low production efforts, so yeah. Anyway, let's talk about the episode and not about how crappy of a person I kind of am. So this episode obviously follows up after the last episode. Basically, Tetsuo is basically going back to Swords of Logos and confirming that he's discovered that Toma was in fact correct. People are transforming into Megiddo. And no, everyone's having a different reaction to it, but ultimately, Reika breaks up the party and says, it doesn't matter if they're turning into Megiddo. Once they're Megiddo, you have to kill them to save people, to preserve the balance, to protect the world. But then, Rentaro chimes in, or Tetsuo chimes in saying that, the Sword of Light can maybe save them. She's like, well, that's just more reason to get the Sword of Light then. So yeah, she's still on the whole, we have to steal the Sword of Light shit, and everyone's kind of into it. And then basically Ren has a moment by himself where Ricky goes up to him and basically reminds him that Toma still has the Sword of Lightning, Ikazuchi, and that he should basically retrieve it because he wants to protect Kento, or at least protect Kento's will and memory, as he's still angry at Toma for believing Caliber or Daichi's words. And he basically goes rage mode throughout the whole episode. Anyway, obviously, Toma is trying to follow or find the kid who got turned into the Megiddo of last week, and has difficulties because he's a very spry little Megiddo. We get a lot of Yuri jokes about Yuri not understanding the modern world, which are kind of funny. Like the one with the bike is kind of hit or miss, but the one with the escalators in this week's episode was honestly pretty funny. Like he's going, well, this is pretty convenient, and then he finds out how he has to get off the escalator to go back downstairs. Like, oh, this is pretty inconvenient. It was honestly a pretty funny joke. Yuri continues to be a semi-delight. He has a bit of a weird attitude this episode where he seems to be distracted, but I don't know by what. Like last week he was distracted by the comic, but this week it just feels like he's just not into the fight for some reason. He doesn't really get into it till much later on. And really doesn't want to fight, and it's never really explained why, which is kind of weird. But anyway, honestly, the big highlight of the episode is when Ren comes in and confronts Toma while he's trying to deal with the Megiddo, the King Megiddo, and then Legiel shows up and basically, Legiel showed up first, then Ren showed up, and then Disaster shows up, who we haven't seen for a hot minute. Disaster shows up, and it's just, it's a four-way fight, so it's kind of chaotic, but Toma's taking the brunt of everyone's attacks, and it's kind of really cool. Disaster basically is on no one's side but his own. Ren is fighting to get back to Ikazuchi, and Toma's trying to stop the Megiddo, while Legiel is just there to fight Toma. So, it's a really chaotic but really cool fight scene, and I honestly think it's a highlight of the episode, but I'm a bit sad it's in the middle of the episode. We still have to wrap up the plot line with the Megiddo. So, that takes up the end of the episode. Anyway, after the really cool fight, Zaz basically tells Ren, you're a lot like us. And I guess he was referring to Megiddo in general. And then Ren breaks down because he doesn't want to believe that. He wants to be a swordsman because, he's Kento's friend and all that kind of stuff. But, he's acting like a bit of a contrived, crazy asshole right now. Especially compared to the other swordsmen who are basically all trying to find a reason to not fight Toma. Ren is all gung-ho about fighting Toma. Which, again, makes sense considering the fact that he was the one who was not the closest to Toma in the group. He was all on Team Kento. Speaking of Toma, throughout the episodes, basically having an issue of resolve about being a swordsman. Like, he remembers his fight with Tetsuo from last episode, and basically keeps tying it back in his head a bit in order to, basically because he sees Tetsuo as a true swordsman and wants to achieve that, which begs the question, what does this show define as a true swordsman? Now, this kind of parallel has come up in the series before, but not when it comes to Swordsman specifically, about what it means to be a Kamen Rider. I remember, like, back in Double, where this was kind of a big chunk of Axel's story, was him basically finding out what it meant to be a true Kamen Rider, as well as Shotaro and Philip as Double, figuring out what it means to be a Kamen Rider as well, following the memory of Kamen Rider Skull. This is also Banjo's big side plot in one of the Heisei Generations movies about why he's a Kamen Rider and what it means to be a Kamen Rider. No, that was also a plot. That was also a bit of a plot and build in general, what it means to be a Kamen Rider. But basically, they're doing that, but replace Kamen Rider with Swordsman in this case, and what it means to be a swordsman, which I think is an interesting idea for a plot line, especially for Toma's character. But by that definition, what does it mean to be a swordsman, considering the fact that Toma is already dedicated to protecting the peace? Especially with the previews for next week's episode, as well as what toy scans have revealed, especially for this month's episode slot. At least some interesting speculation on where the plot's going to go and what exactly is going to happen, but I'm just going to leave that aside for now and get back to the episode. Now, obviously, it all ends with a big fight where Toma and Yuri fight against the Megado and Astorios, who shows up to basically, because it's almost complete. They defeat the Megado. Toma affirms his resolve and basically wants to research more ancient books to grow stronger in a way. There's also a bit where we get a bit of hope of Rentaro joining back, because he's like, hey, I believe you that people are turning into Megado. Let's work together to stop it. And he's like, but Rentaro, we have to deal with the people inside the organization first. It's like, time and place. You're already struggling to find this Megado. You could have really used Rentaro's help in this episode. But it's just like, it goes from like Rentaro being all happy and normal, be like, yeah, friend, let's go fight evil. And it's like, but we have to worry about the bad people in our group. And he's like, dude, it's like, it feels really contrived and out of place for him to just immediately swap back to the whole, hey, the people inside the organization who we can't trust, when he already knows that won't be something that Rentaro will go with at all at this point. We do get a name drop of Master Logos, who is the head of the Swords of Logos, which kind of makes sense, he would be the guy in charge, would have the name of the organization. Which begs the question, is this guy like Yuri and presumably Tassel? Because, we know Yuri's ancient, and we know he knows Tassel. Could Tassel also be an ancient being that's just there as like a narrator figure? Could Logos be another ancient being similar to those two who has some weird connection to Wonderworld and has some way of making himself immortal? We'll probably find out later. It'd be funny if he's just some random dude, considering how the Source Logos is supposed to be this ancient organization. The biggest part about the episode really isn't the episode itself, it's the speculation that it brings from, again, the toy scans, and basically everything that we know is coming up, plus the characters' drives here and there. Because we know Ren has been having a tough time, especially with Kento's death. We know that he is super angry at Toma, and also maybe is carrying some shades of jealousy of Kento preferring Toma to him, which might be helping to drive his anger. So he's raising all the death flags, and I'm kind of looking forward to seeing where that goes. Because let's be honest here, Ren is probably a lot of people's least liked character. Again, he's like Part 1 Naruto, but without any of the redeeming features of Part 1 Naruto. Just the cockiness and the being loud and annoying ninja thing, which, let's be honest, is kind of an annoying trope that Toei likes to use for some reason. Seriously, Ninja should be expelled from existence. Ninja is just the worst season ever. Probably not ever, but it's still pretty bad. And I honestly feel Rin is basically a ninja that didn't die. I'm like, the fuck. Anyway, I do also want to mention the very end of the episode where basically Rio and Tetsuo are going over what they've learned. That they're basically trying to keep it a secret. They know that Sophia isn't with the Megiddo; she's somewhere else, and they're trying to basically figure it out. And they must be starting to believe Toma's words of, there being a traitor organization, which all signs point to Reika and whoever she's working for, who may or may not be Master Logos. It would be weird if she was working for Master Logos. I mean, probably wouldn't be, considering her whole thing of being shifty and mysterious and trying to lead people to their own destruction. Or at least she's led 2 people to their own destructions in the form of Kento and seems to be Ren right now. But, we won't know until the plot lines converge. Speaking of next week's episode, it looks interesting. One thing I do want to mention real quick is that Yuri pulls out another random power. And I think we should keep a list of random powers sort of Light seems to have. Because he pulls out a healing beam. And I'm like, wait, what? I mean, yes, Light does typically get the healing powers in most forms of systems with magic and shit. But it feels really random at this point for him to have all these powers. This is like, I can melt super thick ice that even fire can't melt super easily. I can, I can destroy Megiddo without harming the people within the Megiddo. And I can separate them. I can turn myself into a sword. I can control my shadow. And I can erase people's memories of traumatic events related to Megiddo. And I can also heal people with a touch. And I'm just like, I think we need to keep like a Mr. T joke list about random powers Yuri seems to possess, because it's kind of hilarious how kind of broken Yuri is in terms of the series. I mean, yeah, he's supposed to be a super powerful being and all that kind of stuff, but considering the fact that we really didn't see the Sword of Darkness do much besides absorb attacks and apparently a curse power thing, as well as that one time it seemed to bring Daichi back from being destroyed. Yeah, it feels like the Sword of Light gets a lot more power than the Darkness one, despite the fact these two swords are supposed to be comparable to one another, unless Daichi just didn't unlock the full power of the Sword of Darkness, which could be a plot point, although one we probably won't fall back on, considering the fact that we don't know where Sword of Darkness is right now. Yeah. Anyway, so, yeah. Again, a lot of speculation about where the story could lead up to now. We have the leaks for Primitive Dragon for Toma, which is the standard mid-series Berserker form. Think Shining Cluster Hopper when it first showed up, are for build Hazard form, which I believe they're trying to make more comparable, considering the fact that this isn't something controlling Toma, it's just him going on a rampage. And I believe that these episodes could be the episodes trying to push Toma to that point of being a completely rampaging monster. Potentially, considering the fact that, he's been getting the short end of the stick since, him and the band broke up, basically, in terms of, being separated from his friends and all that kind of stuff, and basically having to fight all on his own. Well, not on his own because he has Yuri, but without the backup he's normally used to. But who knows? I do know that we're going with this being a true swordsman plotline, and that looks to be interesting. Again, we won't know till where it goes, but I honestly want to know, again, define your terms, series. Most in the Kamen Rider examples I used earlier, where they were trying to be a Kamen Rider, or what it means to be a Kamen Rider, they defined what, especially in their respective series, if not the franchise overall, what being a Kamen Rider meant. But in this case, we have to figure out what being a swordsman means, or someone has to define the term, define what in terms of being a swordsman means. Because so far we defend the planet, the balance of the world, which Toma is the one actively doing that right now, because in fact the other Swords logos are basically playing catch up to him at this point. And the organization seems to be having a power struggle within, where some shady people are trying to obtain ultimate power. But again, we'd have to define terms about what it means to be a swordsman, and all that kind of stuff. But I don't think we will, and that will make the whole swordsman thing kind of a semi-nebulous concept until someone defines terms. And I'm kind of annoyed when fiction does this. Like, what does it mean to be a hero? And just doesn't explain what it means to be a hero, or how every person has their own individual ideals of what being a hero actually means. This is something that My Hero Academia does actually pretty well with, because each character defines what being a hero means to them. And I feel like I should be talking about, and I feel like I should stop right now before I start spieling about My Hero Academia and how it actually does a lot of good things and some bad things, but a lot of good things. But anyway, back to Kamen Rider. Speaking of, I'm surprised we haven't had a pro hero based on Kamen Riders in My Hero yet, all things considering. But anyway, back to this. Back to Saber. Ultimately, I do like the episode. Again, we're in the mid-season slump. Those bulk of episodes that normally hit in the 20s, like late teens, early 20s, sometimes the mid-20s to the 30s, like that midpoint in the series where the story feels kind of slumped and we're just basically filling up space for the next reveals about shit until we can get close to the end game. Again, in 01, this was comparable to the whole job battle tournament arc thing. Okay, it wasn't a tournament arc, but you know what I mean. What's another season that shoot, I can't even think of most seasons. I mean, that's the most comparable to what's going on, especially with the whole 2-episode formula thing. When I think about it, Build kind of avoided the 2-episode formula for a bit, didn't it? I mean, it did have those episodes, but it kind of avoided them for the most part, being slightly more serialized. Wizard, I think this is very comparable to Wizard. Speaking of, there was a bit where the Monster of the Week did the whole chin chin joke, and my mind immediately thought to fucking what's his name from Wizard and his whole magic words thing, and the fact that I think, isn't chin chin supposed to be Japanese for dick, or is it on chin chin? What, something with chin chin? So like how chi chi in Chinese is supposed to mean boobs. It's kind of funny. Anyway, that was it might have been a reference to something that I just don't understand at all, or it could have been an intentional nod to Wizard, which would have been really nice to see, because I think Wizard's one of the seasons that gets hit on the worst for absolutely no reason. But we'll talk about that when I inevitably get to Wizard, potentially someday in maybe 10 years. Yeah. So with all of that said, this went on a lot longer than I believed, even though I honestly think the episode in itself wasn't the most interesting of the episodes in the series. Again, it's mostly the episode, this feels like a bridger episode to lead into some more interesting things, especially considering the fact that next week's going to be a debut episode, and we may be getting some term definitions next week too, hopefully, potentially, maybe, hopefully. I really hope they define what being a swordsman means in series, so that it's not a nebulous concept that Toma has to achieve and can literally mean almost anything, which annoys me when it happens. But I'm going to leave that rant aside, and I'll see you all next week for episode 21. Until then, everybody.